Hey there, Alex Kidman here, sitting in, well, this isn't my usual car. This is the MG4 51 Excite. Not exactly a new vehicle, so why am I reviewing it? Well, partially, to be honest, because MG offered me one for review, but also because I was kind of curious with the recent price cuts that MG's made to its range of cars, whether or not this particular model made a whole lot of sense. Because this is the entry-level model. So there's a few features that you don't get on it, and the range is a little bit smaller, and a lot of the other reviews, and I'm not rubbishing those reviews, but a lot of the other reviews will say, oh, look, opt for the one just up from this. You do spend a little bit more, but you get a bit more range. You get things like sat-nav within the center console, which you don't get with this. You do have to pair a phone to get that. There's a couple of other niceties that are not there. And I kind of wanted to see how true that was, whether or not this was a compromised car or not. Basically, was this worth buying? And what were you going to see if you did get it in terms of that range and range anxiety? And the only way to do that, of course, is to take it for a bit of a road trip. So I'm going to go and do that tomorrow. But first of all, I've been driving it around the city a bit just to get a feel for how it goes. And I've got some thoughts on it. Not all of them may well match with yours. And obviously, again, not a new car. So I'm sure there's some MG4 drivers out there who will have some opinions about what I'm going to say. They might even have some tips to throw my way. Let's get into it. So let's start with the center console and controls and steering wheel here. And there's a couple of things that I do like, and there's a couple of things I don't. I love the split between the touchscreen over here and the information screen here, because it makes it very, very clear what you're doing. What you've got here is the stuff that basically you can observe your speed and your power and so on. And what you got over here are the things that you can control. I do also appreciate the presence of physical buttons. Yes, minimalism is nice, but it's also kind of useful to have things where you can go, right, I've got the muscle memory. I know all I've got to do is tap over there to bring the volume up. Didn't expect that to play. Hopefully that won't get me a copyright strike, but there you go. I'm a little bit less enamored of this shelf and coffee cup arrangement, because this is something I can bang my knees into, basically. I don't really feel like I need access to the gear shifter at all times. I mean, apart from, three-point turns and the like. Typically, you throw a car like this into drive and you drive. That's the point. The shelf up here for a phone is decent, although you'll need a slightly longer cable if you are connecting it through for Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Also something I have observed, and this is kind of minor, but if you use a case with your phone, and you should, anyone who's viewed any of my phone reviews knows how manic I am about that, you'll need to make sure that you've got a cable that will connect through the side of the case, because for some phones, especially iPhones, you don't end up with a lot of space for a lightning plug or especially a USB-C plug on the newer iPhones. Now, moving down here as well, you've got your typical kind of coffee cup holders. They're quite low, though. I mean, this is the weird thing with this whole shelf arrangement. I kind of feel like this might be a bit tricky to reach while I'm driving. I will test that more, of course, when I am actually driving. Reasonable kind of setup for storage in here. I mean, not a ton of it, and it is all a bit on the plastic side, but then this is the lower cost vehicle. It's all fine. The seats are reasonably good, too. The steering wheel is a little bit odd. I can't say that I 100% love it. I'm not a big fan of this slightly squared off shape. Is that a racing style? I'm not that kind of driver, so feel free to comment. I can use it. It works for sure. It's not a problem, but I probably would have just preferred a traditional round steering wheel. Maybe I'm a traditionalist. I'm also a little bit nonplussed about these controls. So they're designed for just a couple of key functions, and that sort of annoys me. I'd like a little bit more flexibility in what I'm going to do here. And actually, speaking of key functions, and this is something that really bugs me, if there's any MG4 drivers out there who can assure me that this isn't a thing, because as far as I can tell, it is. I'm a very practical driver, so I've got to preface that. I'm a very practical driver, and so there's a couple of settings that I just always want to have in play. So, for example, driving, I always want one pedal driving mode, but I can't have it because I've got too much power in the car. And even if I don't have too much power in the car, it's not on by default. It seems like I've got to go in and change that every single time. And that annoys me. That I don't understand why that is so. Sure, one pedal driving can help save with regenerative braking and so on, but it's about more than that. If you want to actually drive with just one pedal, you have to remember, oh, I've got to enable that every time I get in the car. And I wish there was a save button here somewhere. And if there is one, if I'm missing a trick, please let me know in the comments below. The back seat is, well, actually very, very basic. Reasonable size for a hatch. I mean, I'm not the smallest bloke in the world, but as you can see here, I do fit in. That would be okay-ish. There's no pockets on the backs of the seats for storing stuff, just a tiny little cubby thing down here, along with a single USB for charging. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much just your lot. It is very basic, very essential back here. Much the same story with the boot too. The one that I had a granny style charger cable. That's in that MG bag there. You don't usually get a shopping bag, but I was doing some shopping that day. And then underneath the false floor, you've got a Tyre repair kit, but no additional storage space. And yeah, look, I mean, it's functional. It's hatch size, so it's not the biggest you're going to get, but it was certainly good enough for the road trip I was going to take. So on the minor niggles front, I had a tyre pressure warning, which I want. I want that to come up. I want to know that my tyres are low on pressure before they go flat. But in checking all of that, discovered there's no real way to change the units of pressure. So, you know, I would typically look for PSI, of course, and that's just not the story here. Which, I mean, it's not a killer problem. All the details are in the little metal plate in the door jamb, as you'd expect, and I was able to obviously get it fixed, as you can see. But yeah, these little UI things, they do add up just a little. So just about time to set off on my road trip. The car is 100% charged. Now, it tells me that it has a range of 364 kilometres and, well, maybe if I was willing to do the whole trip at like 40 kph, which I'm not willing to do. The point of this trip really is to see what kind of achievable range I can get and what that means in terms of the charging. Because typically for this trip, and some of the other vehicles I typically drive, some of the other EVs, I could do this with either 1 or 2 stops, depending on the range of the EV. I'd probably do it with 2 to be more comfortable, really, just to do smaller charges at 2 locations rather than one larger one at one. This, well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it'll almost certainly be 2. Of course, it won't be 1. I can guarantee that. But we'd better hit the road. But of course, this was Sydney on a Friday afternoon, so I wasn't going to hit the road fast. I've not slowed this video down in any way. This is what the M7 was doing to me and that I was paying for. Quite annoying. Not MG's fault, of course, and I guess on the plus side for a longer road trip, this is far more power efficient because I'm getting lots of regen braking action in. But I look excited here. I would have loved to be able to use one pedal driving here too. It actually would have really helped. But because this was early in the journey, I had more than 90% power, I couldn't enable it. Another small annoyance, and that one does fall to MG entirely. But eventually matters did clear at least a little bit, and I could actually start to drive at some levels of speed, making it towards my first destination for charging, which was the BP chargers at Marulan. Now, this is a stop that I've used before many, many times. In fact, I first used this particular charging stop back when BP had its chargers for free because they were experimental. And that's typically because I can grab a feed here while I charge. It all works well. It's all typically in the past worked nice and quickly, but, well, not this time. This time there were problems from the get-go. It was harder to get it to start charging. As soon as I did, the CHAdeMO port on the other side decided, actually, I'm going to go out of action. And even when it did not charge fast. Maximum of 23.5 kilowatts, which is not fast. It's not what it should be doing. And I was kind of frustrated at this point. Now, this isn't down to the car, this is down to the charging networks, but it was annoying because I could have gone on to Goulburn, but then I might have found the same problem there. I took a kind of bird in the hand approach here and just decided to stay, but I had to stay for way, way too long. One of the other side effects of staying that long is that I had a lot of people come and have a look. Now, some people are just curious, and that's fine, that's cool. And some people are jerks and idiots. I had one guy in a lowered ute who decided he'd stop and rev about half a dozen times directly in front of the car, staring straight at me. He knew what he was doing. And I just thought, well, mate, if you really feel the need to advertise your genital inadequacies in front of me, then you go right ahead and do you. It's not going to make a difference to me. But eventually, slowly, painstakingly, the charging was done and I could hit the road again. It's gotten dark now, and it certainly hasn't got any more interesting, so I'll just skip straight ahead to my next charging destination, which were the Tesla chargers at Yass. I've used these ones before, with a Tesla though, and so this was the first time I'd used a non-Tesla at a Tesla charging station. And yes, I'm paying slightly for speed I can't entirely use here, but I've got to say, it worked. I mean, this site is spooky as at night, but this all worked very well. It was a nice quick charge. It got what I needed to get me to Wagga without a particular problem. And it was, of course, because of that massive delay on the M7 and because of the slowness of the speed of the charge at Marulan, neither of which is MG's fault, but I'm also kind of reviewing what's happening with the road charges as well. It was quite a bit later than I really wanted it to be, so I just kind of wanted to get to Wagga and get a night's sleep in. And eventually that's exactly what I could do. Getting quite late now, and one observation actually on the MG4 is its automatic lights, which are very sensitive to other vehicles. Now, I like that. I like obeying Wheaton's law. Don't blind people on the road late at night. But what I found kind of funny is because of the way it cuts in and cuts out, and you'll see this in this video a little bit, it kind of reminds me of the way that early polygonal video game racing games used to draw the distance. Sometimes they could keep up with where the distance was, and sometimes they couldn't, and the world would pop into view. And it very much felt like that. It feels like it can't quite keep up with its rendering distance when the high beam cuts in or out. Now, I never felt as though I couldn't see where I was going. This wasn't a safety issue. It was just a kind of funny thing to observe along the way. And when you've been driving this long and you're this kind of exhausted from the drive, you take your laughs where you can get them. Wagga is actually a wonderful and picturesque kind of place. I really enjoyed doing the parkrun the following morning, even though it meant that I really didn't have that much sleep. But eventually, of course, I had to actually make my way back. MG wanted their car back after all. And that meant that I actually had to charge it up before I went. Now, Wagga has two choices on this. There are Tesla chargers there, which I have used before, but I'm not a big fan of giving Mr. Musk money if I don't have to. I think the man's a Burke. And then there's the NRMA chargers in Cross Street, which I had previously last used, again, back when they were free. Now, I'm not harping on free here. I think it's perfectly fine to pay for EV charging, but this one got kind of interesting. So NRMA has an app for charging, which totally does not work for me. They're convinced that I'm already signed in under multiple phone numbers for some reason, and I'd lack the patience to chase them on their phone system to fix their problem and their mistake. That also relates to a long-standing and rather dull insurance matter I had with them many years ago. I won't go into that here. However, it shouldn't matter because they're also ChargeFox and you can use an RFID card. And with a bit of fighting, a bit of struggling, a few replugs, I managed to get the car charging. And I went off and had dinner. It's a great way to spend your EV charging time, I find. And then I got back and the car was charged at 94%. All of that worked. All of that was great. What I don't know is what it cost. Because usually with these things, you get the invoice almost straight away. You've already pre-authorized the credit card. You'll get an email saying, hey, here's your charge session. Here you go. And you're off and away. And in this case, a couple of days later, I still don't actually have a charging estimate. I don't have an invoice from ChargeFox or the NRMA. If anyone from ChargeFox or the NRMA wants to contact me, I'm more than happy to pay. I'm more than happy for you not to charge me if that's what you really want to do, but I don't think you do. I don't know why this didn't work that way. It just didn't. And if you're thinking, well, why am I going on about public chargers so much? Isn't this an MG4 review? Well, the two tie in together because in a lower range car like this, you want to make sure that you can actually charge, that the chargers are going to work, that they're going to charge you properly and appropriately. And I had more fights than I was expecting here. The charger situation in Australia has been improving, but it's kind of clear that we need a bit of maintenance going on here, folks, in order to make sure that the chargers that are there are still working. The next day dawned and I was back on my way to Sydney. But because it was daylight, it was now legal and safe for me to use cruise control. And I wasn't expecting much. It's a lower cost vehicle, but I was really, really impressed. It did an excellent job of maintaining speed even when going downhill where a lot of cruise controls will tend to slip over by a kilometre or two or maybe even more. It's adaptive cruise control, so its distance measuring from other vehicles also worked really well. I mean, there's no traffic around me at the moment, but give me a second or two. And yeah, it manages it really, really well. That car's actually now pulling away, but it had just cut in front of me. The car slowed down, it managed the speed, it managed the distance, and it did this in heavier traffic too. Really, really impressive stuff. I know some people really don't like this. They want full control themselves. That's fine. You can totally do that too. I'm perfectly happy with this, and this worked just as well as it does on my Model 3, a much more expensive machine. This is a big tick for the MG Excite 51. Next stop, Gundagai. I could have stopped at Yass, but I wanted to stop at Gundagai, both because it was a little bit closer, and obviously if it hadn't worked, I could go on to Yass, but also because it's often seen as the whipping boy for EV charger uptime. And I've got to say, I kind of agree with that. Every other time I've been through Gundagai, the ChargeFox chargers there have all been offline. Now, they weren't when I was there, And they've moved too. They used to be around the back, now they're around the front. And I was able to get a nice fast charge here. I basically plugged in, the rest of the driving crew went for a bathroom break, and I barely had enough time to go and examine a freakishly large koala and then bump into Anakin Skywalker for some reason before it was time to hit the road again. Now, at this point, I was planning to next stop in Goulburn, and I had charged for a relatively short period of time, as you could see, in Gundagai. But I charged to a point where the car itself suggested that I should have about 50k worth of range. It is worth noting that the gasometer in EVs is not super accurate, same as it is in petrol vehicles, really, because there's so many other environmental factors here. But I'd given myself that 50k buffer thinking, oh, look, that's okay, and if things go sour in Goulburn, I can always maybe make it to maybe Marulan or Mittagong or one of the other charges along that way. However, yeah, it wasn't exactly what happened. I did get to Goulburn, spoiler, but by the time I got there, my 50k buffer of distance was down to under 20k, which basically meant that I kind of had to charge in Goulburn. And this again was where things got interesting. So I got quite lucky with charging, actually, because I never really had to wait for a charge. And when I got to Goulburn, all 3 chargers were available. So that's 2 ultra-fast and 1 fast charger. But you can see I'm plugged into the fast charger, and that's not accidental. The first ultra-fast charger I plugged into, because while I would pay a little bit more for that, I did kind of just want to get home by this point, just refused to work. I spent about 5-10 minutes trying to get it to work, and it just did not want to. And PlugShare did note that one of the 2 stations there, one of the 2 ultra-fast stations, was not working and that a repair was going to be done, but didn't specify which one. And I just thought, oh, I don't want to spend another 5 to 10 minutes fighting this other ultra-fast charger. Fine, I'll just grit my teeth and I'll plug in at the 50 kilowatt one, which is what I did. And look, yes, it worked. It was kind of slow. What was also interesting, though, was while I was waiting there, because I had to wait a bit longer because it was only a slower charger, another MG pulled up, and it was, in fact, the MG4 Essence, the Model 2 up from this. And it was pretty much a first-time driver and first-time charger, and I did warn him, hey, these other chargers are maybe not working. And he didn't try the first one that I had tried, which just appeared to be totally dead. He tried the middle one and couldn't get it to work and I got out and gave him a hand, and eventually, slightly annoyingly to me in a way, it did start working. Now, I was happy to help someone out, ultimately. I think that's the general good here, and I think you should help people when you can. I was still charging. It wasn't a big drama, slightly irksome to me, but good to be able to help someone out and talk them through how the chargers worked and what you can do when things don't go right and which apps to get and so on. So that was all a net positive, even if I had to wait here a bit longer than I really wanted to. Are we there yet? 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 No, we're not there yet, but we are getting there. Added bonus on the way, some skydivers. You don't see those every day, let alone a huge big pack of them. But eventually I did make it home, so I guess I'd better get to my verdict on this car. Having now driven it over 1,000 kilometres in total, I can totally see why the MG4 gets the plaudits it does. While there are some interior design choices I don't love, and the fact that it excludes GPS on the cheaper model befuddles me, honestly, it's otherwise a nicely equipped car that mostly lives up to its promises. There's some UI oddities too, but those might be across the entire range from what I can see. The charger issues that I've laid out in that trip are not, of course, MG's fault. I'm not suggesting that at all, but they are an important consideration for people thinking about purchasing, as well as a bit of a point of notice that, yeah, charging is getting better. I've observed that all the time I've been driving EVs, but we're definitely into a phase where it would be really nice if a whole bunch of those chargers were being properly maintained a bit more often. But then there's the question of whether or not the Excite 51 is the model that you should buy. I can ultimately see the sense in spending the extra on the Excite 64. That's $4,000 more at the time of recording because of that additional range if you do longer road trips. And equally, if your budget can stand it, the extras that you get on the Essence model are quite nice. One of the things I was actually able to do, oddly enough, when I was stopping and helping that guy in Goulburn, he had the Essence, and because he didn't really understand the in-car menus, I walked him through a bunch of them, and they were the first time I was seeing them as well, but I'm just reasonably au fait with UIs. So I could kind of see what it could do that the Excite didn't. It's a nice vehicle too. But there's going to be plenty of people, and especially in these constrained financial times, for whom the Excite 51 is going to be all you could afford in an EV ever. The other models just aren't going to be accessible to you. And here's the thing, this is fine. For everyday city driving, more than fine. But even for these longer road trips, with a bit of preparation and a little bit of patience, yeah, you can get most places. I know someone's going to pop up and say, oh, I live 3,000 kilometres east of Perth and these things are useless there. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Calm down, mate. The reality there is, if that's you, yes, that is true. There's some very, very long distance pieces of Australia that are not terribly EV friendly. That too is improving. But the reality is that you are in a minority. The majority of people do live in cities and towns, basically clustered around the seaboard. And for them, this is a very serviceable, very good value vehicle, and one that I would generally recommend. Anyway, that's my take on the MG4. Now, I know this is not a new car. I know there's going to be a bunch of you out there who already have one, who have tips or ideas or observations, or think that I've gotten something wrong or missed something. Please comment below. I'd love to have a discussion with you. Let me know what you think. And as always, thanks for watching all the way through to the end. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe.